Hello, welcome to my shop. Today I want to show you how I turn log sections like this into turning blanks like this. Lots of different sizes, lots of different shapes. Really doesn't take much effort at all. I use an ordinary shop bandsaw and no extra attachments. For me, the bandsaw and the lathe are the two most useful machines in the shop. Green wood in this part of the country is usually free, but good turning blanks can be hard to find, especially larger blanks. A couple of larger blanks. This is a piece of cherry, 4 by 7 by 15 inches. Cut that up on the shop bandsaw. This one's 6 by 6 by 11. That's a nice size chunk. There. Piece of spalted maple. Make a nice vase or something. And here's a piece of ambrosia maple. It's ambrosia maple. It looks like it's 6 by 8 by 12 inches. I turn a lot of smaller things too out of smaller blanks. For example, out of a piece of holly like this, I like to turn magic wands like this. I turn lots of different things, mostly from dry wood. You know, sometimes things are best turned from dry wood. Things like lidded boxes, thin spindles like the wands, utility turnings, lots of utility turnings like pepper mills, rolling pins. It is so handy when I want to go turn something, just grab a piece off the shelf. To make things like those, I keep lots of turning blanks on hand. I've been processing and drying blanks for about 15 years now, and I'm starting to run out of room. If you process a few blanks occasionally, then before long you'll have an abundance, so many to choose from. I use an 18-inch Rikon bandsaw with a 12-inch cutting height. More power in a bandsaw helps, but it's not absolutely necessary. For lots of years I used an older Delta, 14-inch Delta that didn't have very much power, but had a riser block and would cut 12 inches high. Even large blanks like this, I could easily cut on that old Delta. I just had to cut a little bit slower. I know you can make and buy sleds and jigs and things to hold the logs, but you can cut safely and accurately with just the bandsaw. I use two basic methods to cut up logs on the bandsaw. One is standing the log on end. The other is ripping down the center. Move some of this stuff out of the way. Okay, there's two different methods. This one would be done with the rip method because it's longer than 12 inches. It's about 15, 16 inches. But the diameter is less than 12 inches. So it would work great for the ripping method. Well, we'll do one of these after a while. I want to start with what I call the standing method. If the height is 12 inches or less, for a 12-inch cut bandsaw, of course, then I almost always use the standing method because it's more stable and it's really easy to cut. The diameter on this one is about 12 inches, but that really doesn't matter. You can cut wider, larger diameter pieces that way. The diameter can basically be whatever you can lift, or maybe with some help, lift with some help and get to the bandsaw. So I've cut up some rounds that were 16 and 20 inches in diameter. For example, let me show you. This piece of spalted maple came from a log that was about 16 inches in diameter. And this ambrosia maple, 6 by 8 by 12, it came from a log that was about 18 inches in diameter. It wasn't really a problem. You just have to be careful. Okay, time to cut to the chase. Let's start with show you about the standing method. The first thing I do is inspect the log carefully. I look for cracks, I look for defects, I make sure that at least one side sits nicely on the table. Let's check both sides. Yeah, this one would need a little trimming on that side, which I can do in a heartbeat. Let's see. Or use a little saw or something. Anything to make it sit flat. I haven't decided which side I'm going to put down yet. Okay, so both sides will sit flat. Okay, the next thing I do is mark the pith on both ends. And I use a red Sharpie or something like that. There's the pith. Draw a circle around it so you see, and I like to draw any checks or cracks that are visible. Mark the pith on this end. Crack through there. Then I decide where I'm going to cut through. If the pith is in the center, it doesn't really matter. If the piths are offset, if the tree had grown leaning, why then I like to line up the pith so when I make a cut, it'll cut through both piths at the same time. It makes cutting the rest of it easier. Okay, let me see. On this one, the orientation this way and this way. I think I will get a square here. I think I'll just cut it straight through here. Right through the pith. So I'll make a line, and that's the line we'll follow on the bandsaw. Okay, let's carry this to the bandsaw and see if we can cut it up. We'll get set up and cut this one in half. But before we turn the bandsaw on, we need to talk about safety. Bandsaw is a very safe saw compared to other saws especially, but there's several things we've got to remember and keep in mind. We want to cut up this and make some nice blanks, but we also want to keep all of our fingers. I made some notes on safety. First are some general safety points. One is to eliminate distractions. That means visitors, pets. I like to lock the door when I'm working on the bandsaw. Use eye protection. Now the bandsaw doesn't throw big chunks of wood at you like a table saw or a lathe, so a full face shield is probably not needed, but at least some sort of safety glasses keep any dust out of your eyes. Dust collection or a respirator. You want to protect your lungs too. I use a cyclone that pulls dust from 3 different places on the bandsaw that works really well. But when I am sawing something that's really dusty, putting dust in the air, I'll use a respirator as well. And another thing is good lighting. I have 3 different lights that I use so I can make sure that I can see exactly what's going on. A big danger with the bandsaw is the unsupported cut. Here's an example. If I have this block, it's angled, and I try to cut like this, the teeth can pull the block down and make an uncontrolled cut and jam the blade, bend the blade, maybe bend up the bandsaw, and maybe hurt your hands at the same time. The unsupported cut is when the wood does not support the teeth all the way down to the table. If I turn it over like this and start cutting through there, the blade is supported all the way to the table. This side, no problem. This way, no problem. Another unsupported cut is a round. If you try to cut a round piece like this, the blade can catch it and pull it, roll it, and pinch your fingers and mess up the blade and have a big problem. It is possible to use wedges on round pieces, but a wedge like this isn't going to help. It'll just roll right up the wedge. But a wedge that is cut to the radius of the round, or very close to it, is able to support it. If I were going to use that, I would use two wedges, one on either side, and that would be safe. However, in general, just don't cut round things. The problem if you've got wood that's not stable on the table. Now, say I wanted to take a cut down through here, the problem is this thing rocks and it won't. It will probably twist and pull the blade into it and make a big mess. Now, something you can do with something that's unstable is, again, use wedges. I save all these wedges that I cut from when I cut out bowl blanks, and so I keep plenty around and hold it like that, and you can push it through safely. Or on this particular piece, might turn it up like this first and make a flat on here and then make my cut right down through here. So there's several ways to do that. There's another unsupported cut is what I call the suddenly unsupported. So I have a chunk like this and it has lots of cracks in it, and I'm cutting away and suddenly the wood splits and causes it to become unsupported, and you've got the same problem as if you've got an angled piece or one that's rocking and that's unstable. So you got to be careful with wood that is punky, wood that has cracks, voids, something that will split. I had a piece of wood once years ago that split and rolled and pinched my finger, but fortunately it didn't lose any blood or any finger. The most important thing for me is to keep my hands safe. Without hands, it's going to be hard to do any wood turning. Say I'm cutting a small piece like this, or maybe a piece out of a log. I always use push sticks like this to push it through. One pushes it forward, and the other one's pushes it holds it tightly against the fence. And I make my push sticks with kind of an odd shape. I put a finger on the front and then a flat to push with. So with a finger, I can actually apply some down pressure and hold it down as well as against the fence. I make these out of any hardwood, strong hardwood. I like to use Osage orange. Let's see. Another thing is don't use too much pressure. Say you're making a cut and the blade is getting dull or something, and you have to use a lot of pressure to make a cut. This is dogwood, it's pretty hard anyway, and make a cut. And with too much pressure, it's bad for the saw for one thing, bad for the guides, but it also can get you off balance, or what if it catches or something and suddenly goes forward with a lot of pressure? Bad things can happen in a hurry. So don't use too much pressure. That's a good reason to have a good sharp blade every time you cut. I buy blades by the box and replace them often, but I also like to sharpen them. I usually sharpen them 2 or 3 times. Now, one thing is, how do you tell if the blade is sharp? Feels sharp to my thumb, but what I found out is if I use my fingernail or thumbnail, if it catches on the thumbnail, it's sharp, and if it just runs over smoothly, it's getting dull, even though it would feel sharp with the finger. So, and this blade is still sharp. Okay, I have a mantra I always repeat to myself when I'm cutting is, where would my hands go if the wood suddenly disappeared? And that means if my fingers are back in line with the blade and the wood were to disappear, then I would go forward and cut my finger. So how can the wood disappear? Same as suddenly unsupported. It could crack, it could break, it could run into a real soft pithy spot or a void. So I repeat that every time I make a cut on the bandsaw. Where would my fingers go if that wood suddenly disappeared? Taking off a small piece like this, I might hold it like this, or use a push stick to help support it. Just keep my hands away from the cutting blade. Okay, if you're not quite sure how to set up your bandsaw, things like how to align the blade and how to set the guides and how to set the tension properly, I can recommend some books that has helped me. A couple of good books. One is The Complete Guide to Bandsaws by Mark Duginski. This is the best I've found, not only on how to set up the bandsaw, but how to get it to do what you want to do. He even has a section on sawing logs. Another book, Lonnie Bird's bandsaw book, has some excellent info too. Well worth reading. And another book is not really a book but a catalog, and unlike any catalog I've ever seen, it's the Bandsaw Accessory Catalog from Itura Design. This issue is about 250 pages, chock full of bandsaw information, almost a course on bandsaws. I bought a number of tools and accessories from Mr. Itura too. Maybe give him a call and ask for his catalog. I'll put information on all these at the end of this video. We're finally ready to make a cut. Let's see. Blast gate open. Dust collector on. Make sure the height is enough to clear the log. I have a scale. I mounted a scale on my saw, but still I like to sight down it just to be sure. If there's any dirt or mud where the blade cuts into, make your blade last longer if you brush that off a little bit. I have some safety glasses and turn the bandsaw on. Everything's clear, everything's ready. Let's put this little cover on here. First, I make sure one edge will ride reasonably well against the fence. Then I make a straight cut on the other edge. Measuring from the straight edge will let me quickly make accurate cuts. Cutting a thin slice from one end lets me see the wood better to decide where to make the next cuts. This square makes it easier to determine the best size blank I can cut from a chunk of wood. Nice and easy, just enough pressure to cut. A good scale for the fence makes it so quick to set the cutting distance. I keep cutting smaller blanks until there's no more good wood. Even pen blank sizes are worth saving. I like to trim any rough ends to make them smooth and square. As soon as I'm done cutting up part of the wood, I stop and do two things. One, I write the species and the date on the wood on each piece, and this is cherry, and then this is 7/21. The month is enough. This is for drying purposes and for identification. Cherry 7/21. Pull out wood years later and look at it, and it changes color and you can't remember what in the world it is. This helps a lot. And I usually don't worry about pen blanks. Okay, another thing that's extremely important is to seal the ends right away. If you don't, the wood can start cracking right away, very quickly. So I use anchor seal. I put some in a coffee can here and put it on with a brush. I even leave the anchor seal, new anchor seal in it with the lid open for a while and let it dry out a little bit. It makes it a lot thicker and it goes on better and it seals better. Just my way of doing it. Okay, seal the ends. I always seal the end grain. Sometimes I'll seal the side grain, especially if it's figured or if it's certain species like dogwood that has some heartwood and some sapwood in it. I'll seal the sides too because it tends to crack along the sides. After a while you can figure out what needs sealed better than others. Okay, those are sealed up. Put those off and let the sealer dry and then work on the other half. I wanted to stop and say something about the cuts you can make out of a half. In this case I cut squares, turning squares. But if you like to turn bowls, another option is to cut a bowl blank out of this with a long section like that. Let me just see if I can draw it. Keep away from the pith, something like this, and then however high I can make it. Now, even if you want turning squares, there's a big advantage to cutting rectangular pieces over just squares. Say if I cut this rectangular piece, I can just let it dry and decide later if I want to. I can cut it up into squares, I can cut up into small squares, I can cut it into mirror blanks, I can cut circles and make small bowls out of it. You got a lot more flexibility if you leave it in the rectangular form to decide later. Okay, so we'll cut this one up the other way as a rectangular. I'll show you how I do that. First I'll cut the ends just like the other, and then stand it up on its edge, which will be flat and supported, and make a long cut like this. So the first thing I do is exactly as before, trim off one side so I'll have a straight edge to work from. Okay, so lights on, dust collector on, bandsaw on, safety glasses, I usually cut away juvenile wood near the pith, where it would be on the side of the blank. Bending a thin slice will show if there's a crack in the end of the blank. If I find one, I cut back to good wood. It looks like this crack wasn't very deep. here's the haul we got from that one log. Nice big rectangular piece, some small pieces, couple good sized squares, and a couple of smaller squares. And what I'll do next is stack these up and let them dry. Just a word about drying. I've cut and dried hundreds and hundreds of blanks and had very few failures. The more you know about wood structure, how it moves, how it shrinks, the better. There's one book, it's my absolute favorite for wood structure and how to dry wood and how to work with wood. It's Understanding Wood by R. Bruce Hoadley. Hoadley is both a wood technologist and a craftsman. He covers wood properties, structure, wood identification, water in wood, how wood shrinks, drying, finish, and even how to find wood. If you just get one book on wood, this is the one I recommend. It's well worth reading. Okay, let's take a look at the rip method. Remember, it's for log sections that are longer than 12 inches. This one's about 15 inches, but still less than 12 inches in the diameter. And this one is about 10 to 11 inches, so it'll work just fine. So, work on it. Just mark the pith. Do the same thing as with the standing method. Mark the pith. I like to draw a circle around it, and then mark any checks or cracks that are already there. Okay, and then do the other end. This end has a little wax on it. It's harder to see the pith. Pith is right there. I like to draw a circle and then mark any little cracks or checks. Now I have to decide which way is going to be up. I think I'm going to cut it in this direction right here. So I do the same thing. Take a square, mark a vertical line, mark it on the top too, mark a vertical line on this side, and mark it on the top, one end of the line. There's the other end of the line. Here's a straight edge. There to there. And draw the line we're going to follow. It should be right about at the center, so it will be supported all the way down to the table. It'll support the blade all the way down to the table. I think that looks pretty good. Let's carry that to the bandsaw. Okay, this method, the rip method, is pretty much identical to the other method except for the first cut. Okay, it's about 10 inches. Give it a little extra. Sight down it. Make sure nothing's going to bump. Okay, blast gate open. Safety glasses on. Be kind to your blade and brush off any dirt Maybe if it has a little gravel or something in it, make your blade last longer. Okay, and you can use, sometimes I use wedges if I'm unsure about the stability. Just put the wedges in there, and when you push through, it might cut the end of the wedge. It won't hurt anything. I have a couple here for the other end. Probably don't need it on this one, but I'll just show you what I do. I line it up. Okay. Dust collector on. Good lights. Bandsaw on. Be careful to support the two halves just before they separate to keep them under control. All right, since this is, the rest of it is just like the other, I won't take a lot of time on it. Looks like that'll ride against the fence okay. So I'll make a cut down through here. And by the magic of video, we'll try to speed this up some. Okay. All right. I use the red Sharpie to mark visible defects so I can cut them away or cut around them if necessary. There, all cut up and all labeled and all waxed. All right. There are a few other ways to make a log perfectly stable for a rip cut. I'll show you a couple. One is to use a piece of plywood, a couple of pieces of plywood, fasten it to the log, which supports it extremely well. Let me put some on this one. Screws are going into a part that you're not going to use anyway. Once this plywood is on here, you can very easily push the log through the bandsaw. No chance of it rocking or moving, especially if you're unsure of the process or you've got one that's particularly unstable. This might be a good way. This log will be perfectly stable on the bandsaw. Once the blanks are cut and sealed, I stack them on wire shelves to dry. Small blanks might dry in a few weeks. Large blanks might take years. After a blank has dried a bit, maybe a few days or so, I look at it closely. If I see any cracks, I cut them away to keep them from getting worse. To know when blanks are completely dry, I weigh a few pieces from each batch. Let's see, I use a common kitchen scale. And some of this, let's see, 2382. And some of my favorite special tape. And I write the weight in grams and the date on each piece. Every few months I weigh again and record the weight and the date. When the weight quits dropping, the blank is dry. Now this nice chunk of cherry only took about 1.5 years to dry. When completely dry, I inspect each piece again. If I see any cracks or other defects, again, I'll cut them away. Also, wood might darken and sometimes warp as it dries. There's some Osage orange, some red maple. You can see the difference there. And some Bradford pear. I sometimes clean up dry blanks with the bandsaw to see the wood better. I decided to use this piece of Bradford pear to show how I clean up the sides. I simply skim a little off of each side. This does two things. It shows the color and the figure of the wood, and it can reveal hidden defects. Let me turn this on. Dust collector, bandsaw, safety glasses. Okay. We'll put this up here to suck some dust up. After trimming, I mark the blank again with the wood type and the original date. Well, that about wraps things up. I hope some of this will be helpful. As I mentioned before, if you cut up a few log sections every once in a while, before long you'll have a constant supply of turning blanks. I'll list some of the books and things at the end of this video. Stay safe now.